Following the remarkable success of Operation Point Blank, the daring mission, first of all led by a pair of chicanes to destroy enemy air defences and followed up by a powerful strike against Agropole airbase, the Boscali Defence Force, capitalising on the success of Operation Point Blank, launched a second assault into Pala territory. This second operation was aimed at Agrapol City, a deliberate air landing assault straight into the downtown area, carried out by assets from the Boscali air and naval forces. Having secured the city, ground forces deployed from the VL-49 Tarantulas would establish a perimeter, digging in and prepare for an enemy counterattack, whilst other forces would move through the city, targeting predetermined addresses and buildings, places that were home or safe houses for dangerous terrorists wanted for crimes against the Boscali people. The initial landings went off very well. There was large resistance from enemy militia around Agrapol City, and a small number of regular units put up some stiff resistance but were quickly overwhelmed. The vast majority of the militia units tried to escape the city in convoy and were heavily engaged by the guns of the tarantulas as they swooped in to drop off their loads of troops. One of these trucks was carrying a large supply of ammunition, which subsequently exploded spectacularly when the vehicle was struck. This explosion unfortunately caused a small number of civilian casualties. And with a large part of the city now in Boscali hands, additional aircraft could land, dropping off more troops and set up a base of operations within the city to carry out the next part of the operation. One of the main focuses of this operation was the seizure of the supply base within Agrapol City itself, where Pala was storing a large supply of weapons that had been used for attacks against Boscali defence forces. This operation was to be one of the most daring operations of the war so far, and a large portion of the BDF Tarantula fleet was assigned for this mission. Furthermore, as far as politicians were concerned, the attack and occupation, albeit temporarily, of a major Primevan city was considered by many within the Boscali government to be an extremely high-risk strategy. A strategy that may see a greater escalation of the conflict. But the assault had gone on anyway, and so far it had been a remarkable success. Boscali forces were now moving through the city, and more reinforcements were being brought in, whilst the orbiting crickets engaged the retreating Primevan militia forces. But even as the supply point was secured, and more land forces were deployed from the cavernous tarantulas, forces belonging to the Primevan Armed Liberation Alliance were preparing to launch a counterattack. Armoured mechanized platoons were converging on the city from multiple directions. Altogether, these forces amounted to a reinforced armoured company, and it was time for the Tarantula pilots to prove the versatility of their aircraft. With near to no air support available, it was up to them to defeat this advancing force before it reached the city and engaged the light forces of the BDF. Fortunately, the VL-49 Tarantula, when having been rigged out as a gunship, was an extremely potent and well-armed aircraft, capable of carrying up to 20 AGM-48 air-to-ground missiles and an automatic 76mm cannon mounted on the side of the aircraft shooting guided shells. Only a very small number of the tarantulas available for this operation were armed in this way. But even a small number of these aircraft, if well handled, could cause utter devastation amongst an enemy force attempting to advance across open ground against a city defence. And on this day, the armoured mechanized Pala company, attempting to retake Agropole from the very light forces holding it, could do very little to defend themselves from the Tarantula's attacks. However, one Tarantula received heavy damage, having two of its engines destroyed. One of them was on fire, and the pilot attempted to reach the city the landing zone around the supply base. And indeed, as it came in slow and low for its landing, it was targeted by several optically guided missiles launched from the Pala armoured vehicles. However, in the end, it appeared to be a shot from the main gun of a tank that inflicted terrible damage to a third engine, and the aircraft dropped towards the ground uncontrollably, hitting the ground hard and skidding in towards the supply point, somehow missing all buildings and vehicles in the area, and came to a rest where the crew were able to disembark completely unharmed. A reserve aircraft now took over the gunship duties and continued to engage the advancing Pala ground force. By this point in the battle, the main force of Pala troops had arrived to begin engaging the Boscali defenders around Agrapol City. This force, advancing along the road in column, was supported by dedicated air defence assets, and these units immediately began targeting the Tarantulas that were providing air support to the Boscali ground forces. And once again, the Tarantula not only proved its versatility, but also its durability, as many of them were damaged.
Rear left engine failure.
And it was against these units that the 76mm guided cannon was the ideal weapon, able to fire indirectly over hills and obstructions to hit the target from a very long distance, and with the ability to overwhelm the air defense units through sheer weight of firepower. And indeed, this was the preferred method on this day to make the sky safe for the Boscali aircraft. Only a determined air defense network could have stopped the rain of 76mm shells as they plummeted around the Primevan air defense units. And with these units gone, and with the Primevan armoured column strung out along a single highway with no air support of their own, the battle now descended into a turkey shoot, and the column was very quickly wiped out, almost entirely from the air. At last, the Boscali High Command called the men to cease fire. All Primevan forces had been destroyed, and those that had survived were now surrendering to the Boscali forces at Agrapol City. The operation had been a resounding success, and a blow far heavier than the Boscali command had ever thought possible had been dealt against the Pala forces around the city of Agropole. And for now, Boscali forces, land, sea and air, controlled the approaches to the city, whilst the fields and roads to the south were littered with the burning hulks of destroyed tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. The Boscali troops pushed out the perimeter and finished their operation of rounding up wanted terrorists within Agrapol City. Now everybody had to wait for what Pala would do in retaliation.